On September 15, 2008, a 160-year-old financial giant, Lehman Brothers, filed for the largest bankruptcy in U.S. history, and it sent a shockwave across the entire global economy. But this wasn't just a simple business failure. Oh no, this was a story about extreme risk, really clever deception, and one single frantic weekend that changed the world of finance as we know it. So let's break down how it all happened.
To really get our heads around this, we're going to walk through 5 key acts of this story. First, we'll see just how big this company was. Then, we'll dig into the core obsession that put them on this incredibly dangerous path. We're going to look at the accounting tricks they used to hide all the risk. Then, we'll relive that final catastrophic collapse. And finally, we'll see how the fallout completely rewrote the rules for all of Wall Street. You know, to understand the size of the hole Lehman left, you first have to appreciate just how massive the building was. At its absolute peak, Lehman was a global powerhouse, managing an incredible $639 billion in assets. This wasn't just another bank. It really felt like a permanent pillar of the financial world.
So, what was the fatal flaw? Well, it all boiled down to a single overriding obsession that started to warp every single decision the company made.
This quote from a financial analysis, it really just says it all. In the high-flying 2000s, Lehman got laser-focused on this one idea: shareholder wealth maximization. And in the real world, that meant one thing and one thing only: do whatever it takes to make the stock price go up. So this philosophy basically made the stock ticker the ultimate report card. Now, that sounds great for investors, right? But it created this really dangerous incentive to chase short-term gains, no matter the cost. The companies started caring more about how things looked than how they actually were. And just look at this number. For 7 years straight, Lehman spent a staggering 92% of its profits buying back its own stock. Why would they do that? Well, to artificially inflate the price and keep shareholders happy. But what it really meant was the firm was becoming a hollow shell, burning through the exact cash it would desperately need to survive a crisis.
One analysis had this perfect comparison. They said Lehman was like a high-hazard industrial plant where the culture became production before safety. Pushing that stock price higher was more important than being financially safe, which created a system with absolutely zero room for error.
So here's the problem. If your entire focus is keeping that stock price high, but your company is taking on massive, massive risk, what do? You start hiding things. And that is exactly where this story goes next.
Okay, so their main weapon of deception was this controversial accounting trick called Repo 105. It basically let Lehman pretend a short-term loan was a sale. This made it look like they'd gotten rid of a bunch of risky assets, when in reality, they were just hiding them for a few days, just long enough to make their quarterly reports look squeaky clean.
And you know, the experts were not fooled. As one Wharton professor put it, this wasn't some legitimate business strategy. It was, in his words, clearly a dodge, designed for one reason: to fool everybody about the company's real financial health.
And the scale of this deception, it was just breathtaking. You can see right here how the use of Repo 105 just exploded as the crisis got closer. By the middle of 2008, they were hiding over $50 billion every single quarter, just to keep up appearance.
So what was this $50 billion gimmick hiding? Well, this. A truly terrifying level of debt. By 2007, the firm's leverage had hit 31 to 1. Now think about that for a second. For every single dollar they actually had, they had borrowed 31 more. The entire company was a house of cards built on borrowed money.
But here's the thing. You can't fool the market forever. And this chart, this is the moment the deception completely failed. That red line, that's the cost to insure Lehman's debt. And it just suddenly skyrockets. That's the market betting they're going to fail. And at the exact same time, the blue line, their stock price, goes into a complete and total freefall. The confidence was gone.
So this all set the stage for one frantic, world-changing weekend in September 2008, when that house of cards finally came crashing down. The end came with just stunning speed. On September 10th, they announce a shocking loss. By the weekend, you have these frantic, last-ditch meetings happening at the Fed to find a buyer. But by Sunday night, it's over. The potential buyers walk away because the government refuses to help out. And then on Monday morning, with zero options left, Lehman Brothers declares bankruptcy.
And what's wild is that even in those final hours, the key players seem to be living in completely different realities. The CEO, Dick Fold, was insisting the firm was fine, that there was no capital hole. But Fed Chairman Ben Bernanke, he flatly disagreed, stating that Lehman was very likely insolvent. Basically, that its debts were bigger than its assets.
And this really is the billion-dollar question that people still argue about today. I mean, just 6 months earlier, the government had bailed out another failing bank, Bear Stearns. So why not Lehman? Why let this one go, knowing it could trigger a global panic?
Well, according to Chairman Bernanke, the official answer was twofold. First, he argued they just didn't have the legal authority to step in because the firm didn't have enough good collateral for a loan. But second, and probably more importantly, they believed Lehman was so fundamentally broken that any bailout would just be like throwing billions of taxpayer dollars straight into a fire.
The decision not to save Lehman plunged the global financial system into absolute chaos. It proved the firm was, in fact, too big to fail, and the fallout forced a complete rethinking of financial regulation.
And the real-world cost? It was just staggering. Instantly, 25,000 people were out of a job. The hit to the global economy is estimated at 10 times $10 trillion. And for all those people who had lent Lehman money, well, they got back less than half of what they were owed. So the U.S. Congress responded to this catastrophe by passing the Dodd-Frank Act. It was the most sweeping overhaul of financial rules since the Great Depression back in the 1930s. The law's goal was really simple. Make sure this never, ever happens again. It created a council to spot the kind of system-wide risk Lehman posed. It limited the risky bets banks could make with their own money. And crucially, it gave regulators the power to safely dismantle a failing giant so they would never again be stuck with that awful choice of bailout or bankruptcy.
Ultimately, Lehman's collapse was a brutal, brutal lesson in what happens when a system starts chasing short-term appearances over long-term reality. The rules were rewritten to try and prevent a repeat, but that leaves us with the critical question for today. Did it work?